3 million years ago, when the first groups of early humans began to walk the earth, he was among them. At first glance, he looked like any other Australopithecus, primitive and unremarkable. But there was something different about him, something no one could quite name. Even he didn't understand it at first. Aside from his strange obsession with hunting, he thought he was just like the rest, but time would prove otherwise. While those around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he did not. No matter what the world threw at him, disease, wounds, starvation, he simply wouldn't die. Years turned into centuries, centuries into millennia. Civilizations rose and fell, yet he remained unchanged, or so it seemed. Though the passage of time left no wrinkles on his skin, his body was changing, growing larger, stronger, more powerful. With nothing to guide him and no one who could understand his curse, he drifted through the ages, sustained only by the thrill of the hunt, the fury of battle, and the rare satisfaction of a worthy opponent. He was immortal. And he was alone. For nearly 3 million years, he lived this way, fighting, evolving, becoming something no longer human. Eventually, his power reached a level so great that no one on Earth could rival him. People began calling him a god, the god of Earth Mu. But Mu's ambitions didn't stop there. He ascended beyond the mortal plane and challenged the gods themselves, defeating every last one and claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. For the first time in existence, Mu stood at the top of everything, and yet victory brought no joy. With no enemies left to face, no challenger strong enough to test his might, eternity became a prison of boredom. The thrill that once drove him had vanished, replaced by a dull, suffocating silence. One day, in a moment of pure frustration, Mu lifted his foot and slammed it into the ground beneath him. The very foundation of the god's domain, around the size of a planet, quaked with the force of his fury. But that wasn't the worst part. The entire divine realm trembled. Gods, angels, and ancient evils alike felt the shockwave. Terror spread like wildfire, and though they had felt Mu's wrath before, this time felt different. This time, it was a warning. Some deities had grown weary of the constant tremors and power plays. One of them in particular had had enough. Lucifer, the second most powerful god in the realm. Mu, completely bored, acted like he didn't care about the chaos he was causing. His mind was consumed with the same thought that had plagued him for centuries. He had defeated every single worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and now it had been over 1,000 years since he'd faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, Mu muttered to himself, being too strong is a problem too. As the words left his mouth, something clicked in his mind. After 1,000 years of mindless frustration, he suddenly felt like a genius. If his strength was the problem, then the solution was simple. He needed to find a way to weaken himself. In his mind, it was obvious. If he could get a weak body like the Earthlings, he'd have hundreds of opponents to fight. Suddenly, Mu stood up from his seat and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him, then descended to the ground with a thunderous landing. The dragon's height was at least 5 times bigger than God Mu's throne, and from the way it stood, it didn't seem too thrilled about being summoned. But that was just the way the dragon looked. Those glowing eyes belonged to the top god's assistant, and Dragonling was his name. Suddenly, his demeanor changed, and he let out a deep growl and asked why he had been called. To his surprise, God Mu simply started walking away and casually told Dragonling to take care of things while he was gone. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Mu expected. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast a spell, Binding of the Absolute, and in a bold move shackled God Mu in an attempt to stop him. But the moment Mu turned his head and gave him a side glance filled with anger, the dragon's entire demeanor shifted again. His fierce and wild attitude melted away, and he suddenly looked scared and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon tried to explain himself, saying he didn't mean to offend his lord, but that Mu should have at least given an explanation, especially since there was a gods meeting coming up soon. Mu, however, didn't give two flying fucks about the gods meeting. Without saying another word, he started walking, dragging the dragon along with the chains like they were nothing. Seeing his first plan fail, Mu's assistant quickly switched tactics and started playing the victim. He whimpered, saying that if Mu didn't show up for the meeting, he'd be the one stuck dealing with the other god's endless complaints about Mu's actions. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it was nothing. He turned to the dragon and yelled, saying he wouldn't go anywhere if instead of that, the dragon agreed to fight him right now. That was all it took to completely change the assistant's attitude. Realizing that taking blame from the other gods was far better than being torn apart by God Mu, the dragon immediately wished him a safe and short trip. Mu smirked and walked toward what looked like a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched the surface of the mini-Earth. As he did, he began to wonder whose body he should choose to inhabit on Earth. To make the decision easier, he started listening in on the messages Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most of them were trivial and boring, but then one particular message caught his attention. It was a message that was questioning his very existence. At first, the message annoyed Godmu. However, it didn't take long for him to realize something. This person was the perfect choice for him to start his journey on Earth again. For the first time in 1,000 years, Mu felt genuinely excited. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. But while Mu couldn't have been happier, his assistant looked far less enthusiastic about the whole thing. For a brief moment, Mu thought about whether he should give some sort of explanation before leaving. But true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. Much to the dragon's surprise, he simply said goodbye, entrusted the place to him and told him to take care of anyone who might show up in his absence. The dragon felt a mix of worry and frustration when he realized what was happening. God Mu was only sending his soul to Earth while leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind them of the risks. If something happens to Mu's body while he's gone, his separated soul would also die on Earth. But Mu had already made his mind. The idea that no one in the divine realm would dare even think about harming him gave him complete confidence that his body would be perfectly safe while he was away. Despite his attempts to stop him, though only through words, Mu brushed off his assistant's concerns and did what he wanted, just like always. Without further explanation, the scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore, but someone entirely different. Someone who had just defeated the Demon Lord after a grueling battle. The feeling of victory was overwhelming and the person couldn't have been happier. But it wasn't real life. It was just a final scene of a video game that a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old loser named Lee Ho. Lee Ho was painfully jealous of the heroes in every video game he played. Those lucky protagonists who always managed to gather massive harems of cute girls during their ridiculous adventures. And as Lee stared at the game credits rolling on his screen, he couldn't help but sigh, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Lee suddenly let go of his phone, and it slipped from his hand, falling as if from a great height. In mere seconds, the phone hit the ground with a loud crash, shattering into pieces. It was then clear why Lee Ho was standing on the edge of a 3-story building, ready to end his life. With nothing left to live for, his body trembling and covered in injuries, he whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel and unfair world before jumping. As he fell, the wind whipping past him, Lee screamed with tear-filled eyes from the depths of his despair. "If there's a god out there," he shouted, "now's your chance to prove it. Send me to another world." Before he could even finish his plea, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splashed everywhere, and his head smashed directly into the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then something strange happened. Lee's hands twitched, shaking uncontrollably. His chest heaved, and he suddenly started breathing heavily like someone who had just been pulled from drowning. Unbeknownst to Lee, God Mu's soul had possessed him, his body, in the blink of an eye, right before he hit the ground. Now Mu was forced to endure the unbearable pain of Lee's broken and battered body, completely unaware of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Lee's soul had been transported to the divine realm. He stood there, utterly shocked, his jaw practically on the floor. What shocked him wasn't just that he was in some otherworldly place, but that he was standing face to face with a towering dragon, one that definitely didn't look happy to see him. But the shock was mutual. The dragon, too, was stunned. He hadn't expected to see a human so soon in the divine realm. Same as Lee, that definitely hadn't expected the first thing he'd see after dying to be a massive, angry dragon glaring at him. Let's take a moment to rewind and see what really happened just 10 seconds before this entire incident unfolded. God Mu was standing there with that signature smirk on his face, lightly touching the surface of the mini-Earth in front of him. As I mentioned earlier, he wasn't the least bit worried about leaving his defenseless body behind. He had full confidence, too much confidence, honestly. The dragonling tried to warn him, urging him to think this through. But Mu, reckless as ever, brushed off the warnings like they were nothing. Without a second thought, he sent his soul hurtling toward Earth, swapping places with Li's soul. The very next moment, the unexpected happened. As soon as Mu's soul entered Li's body, he realized he was in a dire life-or-death situation. No time to adjust, no warning. He was in midair, plummeting toward the ground at lightning speed. Less than a second, that's all the time he had to process the danger he was in. And then, it happened. Li's body hit the ground with such an incredible force that it was almost impossible to believe. The impact wasn't just devastating, it was catastrophic. Bones shattered into pieces, the body was flung backward like a rag doll, before finally coming to a rest. The pain, it was beyond anything Mu had ever experienced in his immortal life. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What really hit him was the sheer confusion. Why? Why did this happen the moment he set foot, soul, on Earth? How did he end up in such a mess and so quickly? None of it made any sense. His hands trembled uncontrollably at first, the shock coursing through his borrowed body. But then suddenly, everything went still. His hands stopped shaking. The realization dawned on him in that chilling, silent moment. He was dying. No chance to change his fate, no time to fix what was broken. And just like that, his lifeless body collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving ground. The area was eerily quiet, with no one around to witness the fall of what was once a proud and mighty god. No one to help, no one to even notice. But this wasn't the end for God Mu. Not yet. As you know, some human muscles move without conscious control. These are called involuntary muscles, like the heart and internal organs. For Mu, who had spent 3 million years training his body, he had reached the absolute peak of understanding the human form. This allowed him to consciously control every single part of his body, including his vessels and even his internal organs. Nothing was off limits for him. That was exactly how just a few seconds after dying, his heart started beating again. The pain was excruciating, even for someone like Mu. But by forcing his blood to flow through his vessels and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly but surely, Mu began to rise to his feet, as if nothing had happened, even though his entire body was still screaming in pain. But instead of being angry about this chaotic situation, Mu found himself oddly happy. Beaten up, covered in blood, it had been so long since he felt anything like this. This feeling convinced him that he'd made the right choice to come here. His next move was to sift through Li's memories to figure out what kind of life this guy had been leading. It didn't take long for him to learn everything about Li. With that knowledge, Mu decided to head back to Li's home, his new base, to figure out his next steps. Surprisingly, Mu found it difficult to walk with Li's weak and injured legs, so like an ape, he used his hands to support himself, both to move faster and to take some of the pressure off his legs. Not long after, he finally reached Li's home, though the first thing he noticed was a cat had left a poop right in front of the window. As soon as he entered the small, basement-like house, Mu sat down on the creaky bed and started reflecting on what he had learned about Li's life so far. According to Li's memories, he only had one male relative, and that person lived far away from here. It didn't take long for Mu to realize that the guy he had chosen not only lived alone, but was also poor and utterly miserable. His only occupation seemed to be attending some place called school. What amused him the most, though, was the memory of someone at school who seemed to have made it their life's mission to bully him. Not only did this person constantly pick fights with him, but they also went out of their way to make his life a living hell. This, too, was exactly the kind of starting point he had hoped for. It was messy, chaotic, and full of potential for challenges. He couldn't be happier about it. Feeling a surge of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air to celebrate. But the moment he did, a sharp and unexpected pain shot through his right arm. It felt as if the muscles in his arm had torn apart. Something was definitely wrong. Mu figured the pain in his arm was probably because of how he had overused his arm muscles while awkwardly crawling back home. It became pretty obvious that this body hadn't seen much action. The first thing God Mu noticed was that Lee had almost never used his arm muscles for anything strenuous, so even the simplest effort left him sore. Still, instead of feeling frustrated or angry about being stuck in such a weak body, Mu smacked. In fact, he was genuinely happy to feel pain like this after thousands of years of living without it. The next day, the police discovered the bloodstains and shattered glasses at the scene where Lee Ho's body had crashed to the ground. They quickly roped off the area, forbidding anyone from entering as they launched their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu casually returned to the crash scene. Not to check on the investigation, though. The real reason he was there was because that 3-story building near the scene was none other than Lee's school, and Mu had decided to keep up with Lee's daily routine. He strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he found Lee's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he slid the rail door open with way too much force. The door rebounded and slammed back into him, smacking him squarely and leaving God Mu momentarily stunned. His triumphant moment was completely ruined. Mu muttered to himself, slowly stepping into the classroom, drawing the attention of one of Lee's classmates. The boy was immediately annoyed by the noise Lee made as he entered the classroom. He shot him an irritated glare and called him "Idiot Lee Ho," telling him to keep it down. Hearing this, Mu completely forgot about the pain in his face and began walking toward the boy. He stopped right in front of him, standing uncomfortably close, which left the boy momentarily shocked. But it wasn't Lee's weak and frail appearance that surprised him. It was the unsettling, creepy smile on Mu's face. In that instant, God Mu recognized this boy as the bully from Lee's memories, the one who always made his life a living hell. The bully, completely unaware that Lee Ho was no longer the same person, scoffed and mocked him. "What's wrong with you, huh? Did you leave your glasses at home, or are you just too blind and stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could even respond, the bully suddenly swung his fist and punched him square in the face, as if to reassert his dominance over Lee. The punch landed hard, and blood started dripping from his nose and mouth, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bully smirked, clearly proud of himself, and mocked him again. "What happened to your glasses? Did you sell them for cash or something? Or did you just lose them like the idiot you are?" Even with the blood running down his face, Mu didn't flinch. He stood there, calmly, unfazed by the punch. When it came to fighting, God Mu had his own unshakable rules. To him, a proper and honorable fight could only begin when all parties involved had willingly shown their intent to fight. And right now, Mu was waiting for the right moment to respond. As someone always ready to face any opponent, whether it's a god, a beast, or a human, Mu's only concern was confirming his opponent's intent to fight. And the way Mu chose to confirm that intent was simple. He would stand still and take the opponent's first strike. That's exactly what happened here. After taking the punch, the familiar excitement and satisfied smile spread across his face. Without any hesitation, Mu sprang into action, interrupting the bully mid-sentence with a sudden punch aimed directly at him. He thought the pain was the beginning, but in truth, it was just the warning. The real story starts now. Subscribe and witness what no human was meant to see.